A millionaire catches a housekeeper dancing with his son in a wheelchair. What he did shocked everyone. The unexpected moment of joy between two unlikely companions would change multiple lives forever in ways no one could have predicted. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. John Davis had not truly lived for 2 years. His mansion, once filled with warmth and laughter, now stood as a mausoleum to happiness lost. Every morning he wandered through rooms that felt increasingly vast and empty, his footsteps echoing against marble floors that had forgotten the patter of joyful feet. The grand windows, stretching from floor to ceiling, seemed to mock him with their brightness, filtering sunlight that somehow never quite reached the shadowed corners of his heart. The accident had taken everything, not just Amanda, whose absence haunted every photograph he couldn't bear to remove, but also the man he used to be. The successful businessman who had built an empire now moved through his days like a ghost, attending meetings and making decisions with mechanical precision, while feeling nothing at all. Inside that crushing silence, his 8-year-old son, Michael Davis, had retreated into himself. Once energetic and curious, the boy had become a shadow, quiet, withdrawn, and chained to a wheelchair that represented all they had lost. Michael's legs remained still, but it was his spirit that seemed truly paralyzed. His small face, so like Amanda's, rarely showed emotion anymore, his eyes fixed on middle distances as if searching for something or someone who would never return. The medical equipment in Michael's room hummed with sterile efficiency. Monitors blinked, machines whirred, and occasionally nurses or specialists would visit, their voices artificially bright against the mansion's heaviness. John had spared no expense on his son's care, converting an entire wing into a rehabilitation space filled with the best equipment money could buy. Yet for all the technological marvels surrounding him, Michael remained unreachable. At night, when the mansion grew quieter still, John would sometimes stand in the doorway of his son's room, watching the gentle rise and fall of the boy's chest. In those moments, guilt would wash over him in waves. Had he been driving that day instead of Amanda, would things have been different? The question tortured him, though he knew it offered no path forward. Only the distant hymn of city life, car horns, sirens, the occasional burst of music from passing vehicles, reminded John that time was still moving forward beyond their gates. The world continued turning while they remained frozen in grief, two survivors adrift in a sea of wealth that could buy everything except what they truly needed, a way back to each other. Everything shifted the morning Mary Johnson walked through the iron gates. The mansion's security guard barely glanced up as she passed, another in the long line of household staff who rarely lasted more than a few weeks in the Davis residence. Dressed in simple jeans and a faded blue sweater, Mary carried with her a warmth that seemed almost intrusive in the cold grandeur of the estate. Her gentle smile and confident stride contrasted sharply with the somber atmosphere that had settled over the place like dust on forgotten furniture. The housekeeper showed her around with practiced efficiency, pointing out the cleaning supplies and listing Mr. Davis's strict rules. Mary nodded politely, but her attention was drawn to the photographs lining the hallway, happier times frozen behind glass, a family now fractured. When she first met Michael Davis, the boy didn't even look up. Hunched in his wheelchair by the window, his small fingers traced invisible patterns on the armrest as sunlight struggled through heavy drapes. Unlike the physical therapists, tutors, and previous housekeepers, Mary didn't tiptoe around his sadness or speak in the hushed, pitying tones that adults often reserve for children they believe are broken. Instead, she simply went about her work, humming softly as she dusted the bookshelves. "Do you know any stories?" she asked casually on her 3rd day, not expecting an answer. When Michael remained silent, Mary shrugged and began spinning a tale anyway, about a boy who could talk to shadows and the adventures they had together. Her voice shifted and changed with each character, from growling monsters to squeaky mice. Though the child didn't respond, she noticed his shoulders relaxing slightly, his breathing falling into rhythm with her words. Days turned into weeks. Mary's stories grew more elaborate, and Michael's silence less absolute. She caught him watching her from the corner of his eye, the faintest hint of curiosity breaking through his carefully constructed walls. Then came the rainy afternoon that changed everything. Thunder rolled across the sky as Mary pushed the vacuum across the library floor. Impulsively, she unplugged the machine and turned on an old radio sitting forgotten on a shelf. A cheerful melody filled the room, and Mary began to twirling between furniture, using a feather duster as a partner. "Dancing makes the rain jealous," she explained to Michael, spinning past his wheelchair. "It can't decide whether to fall harder or stop altogether." There it was, the miracle John Davis would later witness, the smallest upturn at the corner of Michael's mouth, his eyes following her movements with genuine interest. For the first time in ages, something had pierced through his grief, a tiny crack in the fortress of his silence. John Davis returned home earlier than expected that afternoon. The meeting with his financial advisors had concluded sooner than anticipated, leaving him with a rare pocket of free time. As he walked through the mansion's quiet hallways, the familiar weight of emptiness pressed against his shoulders. 2 years of grief had turned his once vibrant home into little more than an elaborate mausoleum. He approached Michael's room, intending to check on his son before retreating to his study. The door was slightly ajar, and something unusual caught his attention: music. Soft, cheerful notes drifted into the hallway, a sound so foreign in this house of silence that it stopped him in his tracks. John gently pushed the door open and froze at the threshold. Mary Johnson was twirling gracefully across the polished hardwood floor, her simple cleaning uniform swaying as she moved. But what truly paralyzed him wasn't the dancing cleaning lady. It was Mike. His 8-year-old son sat in his wheelchair, small hands clapping in perfect rhythm, his face transformed by something John hadn't seen in years: a smile. The millionaire gripped the doorframe, his knuckles whitening. Michael's smile wasn't just any expression. It was a brilliant, uninhibited joy breaking through years of silence and withdrawal. The boy's eyes followed Mary's movements with rapt attention. His shoulders relaxed, his entire being engaged with the world around him. A complex wave of emotions crashed through John's chest. His first instinct was shock. Who was this woman to take such liberties? But that thought evaporated almost instantly, replaced by something far more powerful. Raw and unfamiliar, it surged through him with such force that he nearly gasped aloud. It felt as if the mansion itself had finally taken a breath after being underwater for so long. The air seemed lighter, the colors brighter. John stood motionless, afraid that any movement might shatter this fragile miracle unfolding before him. Mary spun once more, then noticed him standing there. She stopped abruptly, her expression shifting to embarrassment and concern. "Mr. David, I'm so sorry, I was just—" But John couldn't find words. His gaze remained fixed on Michael, who had turned toward the doorway. Instead of retreating into his shell as he typically did when interrupted, the boy's smile lingered, his eyes meeting his father's with a clarity that had been absent for too long. In that moment, John realized something profound had changed, not just in his son, but in the very atmosphere of their broken home. And despite everything, he couldn't bring himself to feel anything but gratitude. Mary Johnson's presence in the Davis mansion was like a gentle rebellion against the despair that had settled in every corner. She moved through the grand rooms with purpose, bringing light where shadows had reigned for too long. The kitchen, once sterile and unused, now filled with the scent of fresh bread and the sound of humming as she worked. One afternoon, Mary crafted sandwiches into butterfly shapes, cutting the crusts with practiced hands and arranging them on Michael Davis's plate with artistic care. As she placed the tray before the 8-year-old, she hummed an old American lullaby her grandmother had taught her, the melody floating through the room like a forgotten memory. "Butterflies can go anywhere they want," she told Michael, her voice warm and conspiratorial, "even if they start as something else entirely." The boy's thin fingers reached out hesitantly. For months, meals had been battles, with nurses and specialists trying every trick to coax nutrition into his diminishing frame. Yet now Michael lifted the sandwich to his mouth and took a small bite, then another. His eyes, so long vacant and distant, shimmered with something new, curiosity perhaps, or the faintest spark of joy. John Davis stood frozen in the doorway, a witness to this quiet miracle, the wealthy man's breath caught in his throat as he watched his son actually eating with appetite, not merely accepting food as medicine. The boy's shoulders, usually hunched with invisible weight, had relaxed slightly. His wheelchair no longer seemed to swallow him whole. "Would you like another one?" Mary asked, and Michael nodded, a simple gesture that sent waves of emotion through his father. Day by day, Mary created these small moments of wonder. She read stories with different voices for each character, brought smooth stones from the garden for Michael to hold when anxiety gripped him, and played simple melodies on an old record player she'd discovered in storage. John found himself lingering in hallways, watching this transformation. The walls he had built around his heart, thick, impenetrable barriers constructed of grief and guilt, began to crumble. Tiny fissures appeared first, then larger cracks, until he felt something he hadn't experienced since before the accident: hope. One evening, as Mary helped Michael into bed, John heard his son whisper a question about tomorrow's activities. The sound of that small voice, planning for a future instead of dwelling in the past, brought tears to John's eyes. For the first time in 2 years, he saw a glimpse of the boy he feared was lost forever. In Mary's simple kindness, her refusal to treat Michael as broken, John found himself believing in something beyond grief. The possibility of healing, of living again, no longer seemed like a betrayal of what he had lost. The mansion had grown warmer as spring melted into summer. 3 weeks had passed since Mary Johnson first made Michael Davis laugh, and John could sense something shifting in the air, like the house itself was exhaling after holding its breath for 2 years. Mary had established gentle routines. Each morning she'd open the curtains wide, letting sunlight flood Michael's room while humming old lullabies. The 8-year-old would watch her movements, his eyes following her with newfound interest. Though still silent, his expressions had become more animated, his hands occasionally reaching out when she approached. On a Tuesday morning, while Mary arranged his breakfast tray with the butterfly-shaped sandwiches that had become their special tradition, something extraordinary happened. Michael's lips parted, trembling with effort. His small chest rose and fell rapidly as he struggled to form words that had been locked away since the accident. "Mommy?" The single word emerged as barely more than a whisper, fragile as spun glass, his gaze fixed directly on Mary. The cleaning lady froze, sandwich half cut in her hands. The word hung between them, both miracle and wound, both beginning and echo. Tears welled in her eyes as she carefully set down the knife. "Oh, sweetheart," Mary whispered, kneeling beside his wheelchair. Her hands, calloused from years of labor, gently covered his smaller ones. "I'm Mary, remember, but I'm here for you, always." Michael's eyes, so like his father's, remained locked on her face. There was no confusion in them, only trust. Perhaps he knew exactly what he'd said. "I promise I'll always listen." Mary continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Whenever you want to talk, or not talk. Whatever you need." Unknown to them both, John Davis stood frozen in the hallway. He'd been passing by when that precious, devastating word had slipped from his son's lips. Tears streamed silently down his face as he pressed his back against the wall, trying to steady himself. The millionaire felt gratitude crash against guilt like warring tides. For 2 years he'd preserved Amanda's memory in silence and sorrow, keeping her bedroom untouched, her photographs everywhere. Yet in mere weeks, this woman, with her simple kindness, had accomplished what expensive therapists could. John slid down until he was sitting on the hallway floor, covering his mouth to muffle his sobs. Was it betrayal to feel this relief? Was it wrong to be thankful that another woman was filling the void Amanda's death had left? Or was this exactly what Amanda would have wanted? Her son finding his voice again, even if it called for someone else. Inside the room, Mary wiped her eyes and smiled. "Would you like to try saying something else today?" The fragile peace that had settled over the Davis mansion was shattered one crisp morning when the doorbell rang with unexpected urgency. John Davis opened the door to find a ghost standing on his doorstep, or so it seemed at first glance. The woman's face was hauntingly familiar, a mirror image of his late wife. "Jennifer Brown," she announced, extending a manicured hand. Amanda's identical twin sister stood before him in designer clothes that spoke of wealth and European sophistication. Her smile, practiced and perfect, somehow failed to warm her eyes. "I've just returned from Paris," Jennifer explained as she glided through the foyer, her heels clicking gauche marble floors that had known only Mary Johnson's soft footsteps for months. "I simply couldn't stay away from family any longer." John watched her move through his home with an unsettling familiarity. The resemblance to Amanda was uncanny, The same delicate features, the same chestnut hair, though Jennifer wore hers in a sleek bob rather than the flowing style Amanda had preferred. Yet something felt off, like a familiar melody played in the wrong key. "Michael will be thrilled to see his aunt," John said, though uncertainty tinged his voice. When Jennifer entered Michael's room, the boy's reaction was immediate and visceral. His small body tensed in the wheelchair, fingers gripping the armrests until his knuckles whitened. The 8-year-old, who had recently begun to emerge from his shell under Mary's care, seemed to retreat back into himself like a turtle seeking safety. "Darling nephew," Jennifer cooed, bending to kiss his cheek. Michael flinched away from her touch, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for escape, or perhaps for Mary. "He's just shy," John explained awkwardly, though he couldn't help but notice how his son's progress seemed to unravel in his aunt's presence. Over tea in the sunroom, Jennifer regaled John with tales of European cafes and Mediterranean beaches. She spoke of art galleries and fashion shows, yet occasionally stumbled over details a true traveler would know. When John mentioned a famous Parisian landmark, her response came a beat too late, as if she were quickly assembling knowledge rather than recalling experience. "I've missed so much," Jennifer sighed, gazing toward Michael's room. "I want to be part of his life now, part of your life." That evening, as Mary tucked Michael into bed, she noticed how quiet he had become again. The boy who had recently laughed at her silly dances now stared blankly at the ceiling, his small spirit seemingly dimmed by Jennifer's arrival. Something had changed in the mansion. The warmth that had slowly been returning now competed with a chill that seemed to follow Jennifer Brown like a shadow. Mary Johnson was the first to notice the subtle changes in Michael Davis. The boy who had just begun to smile again was retreating back into his shell. His laughter, once a precious new sound in the mansion, had fallen silent. Each day she watched with growing concern as he pushed away his butterfly sandwiches, barely touching his food. "You need to eat to grow strong," Mary encouraged softly one afternoon, but Michael only stared at his plate, his blue eyes distant. His drawings told a story words couldn't. Where once he'd sketched bright butterflies and smiling stick figures, now dark scribbles filled the pages. Heavy black crayon pressed so hard it sometimes tore through the paper. Mary collected these silent messages, her heart growing heavier with each one. What troubled her most was Michael's reaction whenever Jennifer Brown entered a room. The child would physically recoil, his small hands gripping his wheelchair until his knuckles turned white. Mary noticed how he flinched when his aunt reached to touch his hair, a gesture that should bring comfort, not fear. During her cleaning duties, Mary overheard Jennifer telling Michael elaborate stories about Paris cafes and Italian coastlines. "The Mediterranean sunset is unlike anything you've ever seen," Jennifer said, her voice honeyed with false warmth. But later that same day, when John mentioned a local restaurant that had recently changed owners, Jennifer spoke about it with surprising familiarity. "They've always made the best apple pie in town," she remarked casually, then caught us. "At least that's what you used to tell me in your letters." Mary's suspicions deepened. These weren't the mistakes of a returning traveler, these were the slips of someone who had never left. That evening, after tucking Michael in, Mary approached John in his study. The millionaire sat surrounded by paperwork, the weight of his responsibilities etched in the lines of his face. "Mr. Davis, I'm worried about Michael," she began carefully. "He seems afraid of Miss Brown. Have you noticed how he won't look at her? How he stops eating when she's around?" John Davis looked up, his expression hardening. "Mary, I appreciate your concern, but Jennifer is Michael's aunt, his mother's twin. Perhaps you're being overprotective. But sir," or perhaps he continued, his voice cooling, "you're feeling threatened by another woman's presence in Michael's life." The accusation stung. Mary stepped back, hurt flooding her eyes. "I only want what's best for him," she whispered. John sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, I'm sorry. We're all adjusting." As Mary left the study, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mansion's air conditioning. The light that had begun to return to this house of grief was dimming once again, and she feared what might happen if darkness fully returned. Jennifer Brown's presence in the mansion grew more oppressive with each passing day. Her visits stretched from hours into overnight stays, her influence over John Davis expanding like a shadow across the household. The identical twin of Amanda carried herself with the same grace as John's late wife, but there was something calculated in her movements that Mary Johnson couldn't ignore. "I'm concerned about the amount of time Mary spends alone with Michael," Jennifer whispered to John one evening, her voice dripping with manufactured worry. "It's not appropriate for the cleaning lady to form such an attachment. He might become confused about boundaries." John, still vulnerable in his grief, nodded along. "Perhaps you're right," he conceded, running his hand through his hair, a nervous habit Mary had noticed whenever he felt conflicted. The next morning, John called Mary into his study. The millionaire sat behind his mahogany desk, looking uncomfortable as he delivered the news. "From now on, you're not to be alone with Michael. Jennifer will supervise your interactions, or another staff member will be present." Mary's heart sank. "But sir, Michael has been making such progress." "That's all," Mary John said firmly, though he couldn't quite meet her eyes. The cleaning lady left the study with tears threatening to spill. She had watched the 8-year-old boy emerge from his shell, had witnessed his first genuine smile in months. Now Jennifer was systematically dismantling that progress, brick by brick. But Mary refused to abandon Michael. During her cleaning duties, she slipped small notes under his pillow. "Stay brave, I believe in you, and remember our butterfly sandwiches." Simple words of encouragement that wouldn't raise suspicion if found. From the hallway, Mary would pause while dusting, watching through the crack in the door as Jennifer read storybooks to Michael without the funny voices he loved. The child's face remained blank, his eyes dull, his hands motionless in his lap. Gone was the boy who had clapped along to Mary's dancing. Once, their eyes met across the room when Jennifer stepped away to answer her phone. Michael's small fingers formed a butterfly shape, their secret signal before dropping back to the wheelchair armrest. That tiny gesture gave Mary hope. "I won't give up on you," she mouthed silently, before Jennifer returned and closed the door firmly in Mary's face. The mansion grew colder despite the summer heat outside. Mary continued her duties, biding her time, watching and waiting for any opportunity to protect the child who had come to mean everything to her. One quiet afternoon, as Mary Johnson was folding laundry in Michael's room, the 8-year-old boy suddenly reached under his pillow. His small hands trembled as he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, hesitating before pushing it into Mary's palm. Their eyes met briefly, his filled with fear, hers with gentle curiosity. Mary smoothed out the drawing, and her breath caught in her throat. The crayon illustration showed 2 women inside a car. They weren't sitting peacefully, their stick-figure arms were raised, clearly fighting. What struck Mary most were the vivid blue tears streaming down the page, creating puddles at the bottom of the paper. The raw emotion was unmistakable, even in a child's artwork. "Did you draw this, Michael?" she whispered, kneeling beside his wheelchair. The boy nodded, his fingers nervously twisting the hem of his shirt. Mary's heart pounded against her ribs. These weren't the imaginary monsters or superheroes typical of children's drawings. These were memories, painful, specific memories that Michael had been carrying alone. "Is this about the accident?" she asked gently. Michael's eyes welled with tears, and he gave the slightest nod. Mary studied the drawing more carefully. The figures were nearly identical, same hair, same shape, twins. Amanda and Jennifer. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Michael hadn't just witnessed the accident, he had seen something crucial before it happened. "Were you in the car that day?" Mary asked, keeping her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. Michael pointed to a tiny figure in the back seat that Mary hadn't noticed initially, a child with tears matching those that filled the rest of the page. Pieces began falling into place. The timing of Jennifer's return, Michael's regression whenever she was near, his nightmares that always seemed worse after her visits. The cleaning lady pieced together his silent cries. Michael wasn't just traumatized by losing his mother, he was terrified because he knew something about how it happened. Mary carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into her pocket. "I understand now," she said softly. "Thank you for being so brave." As she helped Michael prepare for bed, Mary felt a chill run down her spine. If her suspicions were correct, Jennifer was far more dangerous than anyone realized. Mary would need to find a way to bring this to John's attention, to make him see past his grief and recognize the threat living under his roof. She kissed Michael's forehead, making a silent promise to protect him, even as she realized her own position in the household. and possibly her safety had just become deeply uncertain. Mary's suspicions about Jennifer Brown grew stronger each day. While tidying the living room, she noticed Jennifer's designer purse left carelessly on the side table. Something compelled her to look inside. Perhaps it was Michael's fearful eyes whenever his aunt approached, or the inconsistencies in Jennifer's stories about her European adventures. Inside the expensive bag, Mary discovered 3 prescription bottles. Her heart raced as she examined the labels. They were from West Side Pharmacy, just 3 miles from the Davis mansion. The dates were recent, not something Jennifer could have filled while supposedly living abroad. One was for anxiety medication, another for sleeping pills, and the third for a condition Mary didn't recognize. If she's been in Europe all this time, Mary whispered to herself, why are her prescriptions from here? She carefully replaced everything exactly as she'd found it. Jennifer's elaborate tales of Parisian cafes and Italian villas were unraveling thread by thread. Mary had worked for enough wealthy families to recognize genuine worldliness. Jennifer's knowledge seemed memorized, not lived. That night, after John had retired to his study and Michael was asleep, Mary took her cleaning supplies to the guest wing. Jennifer had gone out for dinner with old friends, giving Mary the perfect opportunity. As she dusted the antique dresser in Jennifer's room, her cloth caught on a folder hidden beneath some fashion magazines. Mary hesitated, her conscience battling with her growing concern for Michael's safety. Finally, protection won over propriety. She opened the folder to find legal documents about the Davis family trust and inheritance. The papers detailed substantial amounts, millions that would pass to Michael upon his 21st birthday, with provisions for a guardian to manage the funds should anything happen to John. Most disturbing were the signatures and dates, all processed just 2 weeks before Jennifer's sudden reappearance. There was even a draft letter to John's attorney suggesting changes to the trust, written in Jennifer's handwriting but never sent. Mary photographed several key pages with her phone before carefully returning everything to its place. Her hands trembled as she finished dusting, her mind racing with implications. The timing was too perfect, the coincidences too convenient. As she left the room, the pieces of this troubling puzzle were falling into place. Jennifer hadn't returned out of family loyalty or concern for her nephew. She was orchestrating something far more calculated. Mary clutched her phone tightly, knowing these discoveries might be the only protection Michael and John had against whatever Jennifer was planning. Jennifer's eyes narrowed as she watched Mary dusting the bookshelves in John Davis's study. The cleaning lady had been asking too many questions, lingering too long near personal documents. Something had to be done. That evening, Jennifer Brown slipped into the utility closet, where Mary kept her supply. With practiced hands, she crushed 2 sedatives into the cleaning solution Mary used for the hardwood floors. Her plan was simple yet devastating: make Mary appear incompetent, even dangerous. The next morning, Mary Johnson felt unusually dizzy while polishing the hallway. The room spun as she stumbled, knocking over an antique vase that shattered across the marble floor. The crash brought Jennifer running, her face a perfect mask of concern. "John," Jennifer called out, her voice trembling with manufactured worry. "Come quickly." John rushed in to find Mary on her knees, desperately trying to collect the broken pieces. Jennifer placed a comforting hand on her brother-in-law's shoulder. "I've noticed her behavior becoming erratic lately," she whispered. "What if she has an episode while alone with Mike? Is that a risk you're willing to take?" The millionaire's face hardened as he helped Mary to her feet. The mansion had already seen too much tragedy. He couldn't bear the thought of more. "Mary, I think we need to discuss your position here," he said, his voice strained with conflict. Mary's heart sank. "Mr. Davis, please, I would never do anything to harm Michael. I love that boy like he's my own." Jennifer interjected. "That's precisely the problem. You're overstepping boundaries." John led Mary to his office, the weight of decision heavy on his shoulders. Grief had made him cautious, perhaps even paranoid. Was he being unfair? Yet Jennifer's warnings echoed in his mind. His sister-in-law was family after all. "I'm sorry," he began, "but I think it might be best if—" A commotion in the doorway interrupted him. Michael had wheeled himself down the hallway, his small face streaked with tears. The boy's hands trembled as he reached desperately toward Mary. "No," Michael cried, his voice breaking weeks of near silence. "Stay. The raw emotion in his son's plea struck John like a physical blow. He watched as Michael gripped Mary's hand, refusing to let go. Jennifer stepped forward. "Michael, sweetie, this is for your own good." The boy shook his head violently, clinging tighter to Mary. John stood frozen between his sister-in-law's insistence and his son's desperation. The household had become a battlefield. Jennifer's manipulations on one side, Mary's genuine connection with Michael on the other. That night, thunder rolled across the sky, mirroring the tension that filled every room of the mansion. In the kitchen, staff whispered behind cupped hands. Upstairs, Jennifer paced her room, plotting her next move. And in Michael's bedroom, Mary sat quietly reading stories, both of them knowing their time together might be running out. Thunder rattled the mansion windows as Mary Johnson prepared the tea. Jennifer had requested. Rain lashed against the glass, creating an ominous backdrop to what should have been a simple evening task. The cleaning lady had been working late, tidying the guest rooms when Jennifer Brown approached with an unusually pleasant smile. "Would you mind making me some chamomile? It helps with sleep on these stormy nights," Jennifer said, her voice honey-sweet in a way that made Mary uneasy. Mary nodded politely and headed to the kitchen. As she prepared the tea, she noticed Jennifer lingering nearby, watching her movements with an intensity that felt predatory. The moment Jennifer stepped away to answer a phone call, Mary poured the steaming liquid into a delicate porcelain cup. When she took her first sip, something felt wrong. The tea tasted bitter with a metallic undertone that chamomile should never have. Mary's lips began to tingle almost immediately, and within seconds her vision blurred at the edges. She set the cup down with trembling hands, suddenly understanding Jennifer's unusual attentiveness. "Are you feeling all right?" Jennifer asked, returning to the kitchen with mock concern. "You look rather pale." Mary didn't answer. She needed to reach Michael. Stumbling through the hallway, she used the wall for support as the mansion seemed to tilt and sway around her. Her heart raced with both the effects of whatever had been slipped into her drink and the desperate need to protect the boy. When she finally reached Michael's room, Mary clutched the doorknob, her knuckles white with effort. The 8-year-old was still awake, his wheelchair positioned near the window where he'd been watching the storm. The moment he saw her condition, his eyes widened in horror. Michael Davis tried to scream, but fear constricted his throat. His small body trembled as he pointed frantically at the teacup still clutched in Mary's hand. His eyes pleaded for someone, anyone, to understand what was happening. Mary's legs gave way as she collapsed to her knees. With the last of her coordination, she grabbed a notepad from Michael's bedside table. Her vision doubled as she struggled to form letters, managing only to scrawl the word help before the pen slipped from her fingers. The last thing she saw was Michael desperately reaching for the emergency call button installed near his bed, tears streaming down his face as darkness closed in around her. As consciousness slipped away, Mary's final thought was of the boy she had come to love as her own, now witnessing another trauma that no child should ever have to endure. John Davis burst through the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sight of Mary Johnson collapsed on the floor sent waves of panic through his body. He fumbled for his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed emergency services. "Stay with me," he whispered, cradling Mary's head while Michael watched in silent terror from his wheelchair, tears streaming down his small face. The family doctor arrived within minutes, his experienced hands working quickly to assess the situation. "Symptoms suggest mild poisoning," he muttered, administering treatment that gradually brought color back to Mary's pale cheeks. The medical professional stayed until her breathing normalized, pulling John aside before leaving. "This wasn't accidental," the doctor said quietly. "I'd recommend contacting authorities." Jennifer Brown hovered nearby, her face a perfect mask of concern. "She's been acting strange lately," she suggested, voice dripping with false sympathy. "Perhaps the pressure of caring for Michael has become too much. Some people aren't emotionally equipped for such responsibility." John nodded absently, but something in his sister-in-law's tone struck a discordant note. For the first time, he noticed how her expressions never quite reached her eyes identical to his late wife's, yet somehow cold. The mansion staff exchanged meaningful glances when Jennifer passed. Their whispered conversations fell silent whenever she approached. John caught his long-time butler watching Jennifer with undisguised suspicion. That night, while Jennifer attended a charity function, doubt drove John to her guest room. He hesitated at the threshold, feeling like an intruder in his own home. Guilt warred with growing suspicion as he carefully searched through her belongings. In the bottom drawer of the antique desk, he found a leather-bound diary. Its pages contained detailed notes about local events and people, information no recent European transplant could possibly know. Beside it lay unused airline tickets dated months ago, contradicting her story of recent arrival. But it was the photograph tucked between the diary pages that sent ice through his veins. The image showed Amanda's car on that fateful day, taken from the passenger seat. Jennifer's reflection was visible in the rearview mirror, her expression unreadable. John sank onto the edge of the bed, the photograph trembling in his hands. His mind raced through fragmented memories. Amanda's final phone call mentioning picking up her sister, the confusion at the accident scene, Jennifer's convenient disappearance afterward. The truth began crystallizing with horrifying clarity. Jennifer hadn't just returned from Europe. She'd been here all along, weaving an elaborate deception while systematically isolating Michael and undermining Mary's position in their household. John Herpel replaced everything except the photograph. As he slipped from the room, his grief transformed into something harder, determination to protect what remained of his family from the predator hiding behind his wife's face. Michael Davis hadn't slept a wink. The 8-year-old boy's small hands worked tirelessly through the night, clutching colored pencils with fierce determination. Each stroke on the paper was deliberate, each color choice meaningful. The soft glow of his bedside lamp cast long shadows across his room as he fought against exhaustion, driven by something more powerful than fear, love. By morning his eyes were rimmed with fatigue, but a new resolve had settled in them. He carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into the pocket of his pajamas. When Mary Johnson came to help him dress, she noticed his unusual quietness. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked gently, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. Michael simply shook his head, his fingers protectively touching the paper in his pocket. There was something different about him today, a determination that hadn't been there before. After breakfast, which he barely touched, Michael wheeled himself toward the living room where his father and Jennifer were discussing renovation plans for the east wing of the mansion. The wheelchair moved with purpose across the polished floor, each push of his small arms bringing him closer to a moment of truth. John looked up, surprised to see his son entering the room voluntarily. "Michael, is everything okay?" The boy's hands trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded paper. He smoothed it carefully on his lap before holding it up for everyone to see. The drawing was childlike but unmistakable, a car rendered in careful detail, and in the passenger seat, a woman with the same face as Jennifer Brown. The room fell silent. John's eyes widened as he took in the drawing, recognition dawning slowly across his features. "What is this supposed to be?" Jennifer asked, her voice tight with forced casualness. Michael's lips parted, and for a moment it seemed he might retreat back into silence. But then, summoning courage from some deep well inside him, he spoke. His voice, unused and hoarse but filled with conviction, broke the silence. She was there. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning, reverberating through the mansion's walls. 3 simple words that changed everything. John Davis stared at his son, then at the drawing, then at his sister-in-law. The pieces were falling into place. Memories of the accident report, of conflicting statements, of Jennifer's convenient absence and sudden return. "Michael," Jennifer started, her composure cracking, but the boy's eyes never wavered. He pointed at the drawing again, his finger steady despite his trembling body. "She was there," he repeated, louder this time, leaving no room for doubt or denial. John Davis felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Michael's revelation had shattered the fragile reality he'd constructed, and now memories long buried under grief and denial surged back with devastating clarity. Amanda's last phone call replayed in his mind. Her voice had been tense, mentioning an argument with someone in the car. At the crash site, witnesses had described 2 women, but in his shock and grief, John had dismissed the confusion. "Jennifer disappeared right after the funeral," he whispered, pieces clicking into place. The twin sister who had barely stayed for the service, who had supposedly fled to Europe to escape her grief, had actually been hiding something far darker. Mary Johnson stood nearby, her face pale but determined as she watched the millionaire connect the dots. She placed a protective hand on Michael's shoulder, the boy trembling in his wheelchair but finally unburdened of the terrible secret he'd carried. John's hands shook as he spread out the evidence they'd gathered: the local prescription bottles, the unused flight tickets, the inheritance paperwork dated just before Jennifer's return. His wife's sister had never left the country. She had been plotting, waiting for the perfect moment to step into her twin's life. She wanted your money, Mary said softly. But more than that, she wanted Amanda's life. The mansion's grand foyer suddenly felt suffocating as Jennifer Brown appeared at the top of the staircase, her composure cracking at the sight of the evidence laid bare. "What are you doing with my things?" she demanded, descending with calculated grace that couldn't hide her panic. When John confronted her with what they'd discovered, Jennifer's calm mask finally shattered. Her sophisticated veneer fell away, revealing the desperate, resentful woman beneath. She had everything. Jennifer screamed, her voice echoing off marble walls. The perfect husband, the perfect child, the perfect life. What did I have? Nothing but her shadow to live in. Her eyes, so like Amanda's yet burning with a hatred Amanda never possessed, darted between them. I deserved it more than she did. I was always the smart one, the careful one, but everyone chose her. Everyone always chose Amanda. John stepped between Jennifer and his son, his grief transforming into protective fury. "Did you cause the accident?" he asked, voice dangerously quiet. Jennifer's laugh was brittle, bordering on hysteria. "I just wanted her to listen to me for once. How was I supposed to know she'd lose control of the car?" Her face contorted with ugly entitlement. "I have every right to take what should have been mine all along." Michael began to cry, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. Mary pulled him closer, shielding him from the woman who had brought such terror into his young life. Mary Johnson's body still felt the effects of the poison, but her spirit was unbreakable. With trembling legs that threatened to buckle beneath her, she positioned herself firmly between Jennifer Brown and Michael Davis. The cleaning lady's normally gentle eyes had hardened with determination as she spread her arms wide, creating a human shield for the frightened child. "You won't hurt him again," Mary declared, her voice stronger than her weakened body suggested. Behind her, Michael gripped the wheels of his chair, his small fingers white with tension. Jennifer's face contorted with rage. "Move aside," she hissed, her resemblance to Amanda now twisted by hatred. "This isn't your family. You're nothing but the help." John Davis watched the scene unfold with horror and admiration. For months, he had been blind to the danger living under his roof, but now he saw everything with painful clarity. The millionaire stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Mary. "She's more family than you'll ever be," he said, his voice low and steady. The wail of sirens cut through the tension. Blue lights flashed through the mansion windows as police cars pulled into the circular driveway. Officers entered with practiced efficiency, their footsteps echoing across the marble floor. "Jennifer Brown?" The lead officer approached with handcuffs. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of attempted murder, fraud and conspiracy related to the accident that killed Amanda Davis." Jennifer's composure shattered completely. She lunged toward a nearby table, reaching for something hidden beneath a decorative cloth. John moved with surprising speed, catching her wrist before she could grasp what appeared to be a small revolver. "It should have been me," Jennifer sobbed as the officers restrained her. "Amanda had everything. The perfect husband, the perfect child, the perfect life. I was always the forgotten twin." As the police led her away, her accusations and pleas bounced off the mansion walls. "John, please, you know me. I'm just like her. I could be her for you." Her voice faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence so profound it seemed to have physical weight. The three remaining figures stood frozen in the aftermath, Mary still protectively close to Michael, John staring at the doorway where Jennifer had disappeared. Michael's small hand reached out, finding Mary's fingers and squeezing them gently. The gesture broke the spell. John turned to them both, his eyes filled with tears of relief, gratitude, and lingering sorrow. "It's over," he whispered, though none of them were entirely sure if that was true. The mansion felt different, lighter perhaps, but haunted by new ghosts of betrayal and what might have. In the days following Jennifer's arrest, the Davis mansion seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief. John Davis found himself trapped in a whirlpool of conflicting emotions, guilt over doubting Mary, shame for being manipulated, and regret for the time lost with his son. "I should have seen it," he confessed one evening as he and Mary sat in the kitchen. "I let my grief become a blindfold." His hands trembled slightly as he stared into his coffee cup. The millionaire, once commanding in boardrooms across the country, now looked vulnerable, his shoulders hunched under the weight of his mistakes. Mary Johnson reached across the table, her touch gentle but firm. "Grief doesn't ask permission," she said simply. "It takes hostages." Her steady presence had become the family's anchor, her compassion unwavering despite everything she'd endured. John looked up, meeting her eyes. "How do I even begin to apologize to Michael?" "To you, you already have," Mary replied, "by choosing to see the truth." That night, John knelt beside his son's bed, tears streaming freely down his face. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he whispered. Michael's small hand reached out, touching his father's wet cheek with unexpected tenderness. The gesture, so simple yet profound, broke something open inside John, a dam of emotion he'd held back for 2 years. The healing began in small moments. Michael started forming sentences again, his voice rusty from disuse, but growing stronger each day. "Can we have music?" he asked one morning, pointing to the grand piano that had remained untouched since Amanda's death. John hired a piano teacher who specialized in adaptive techniques for children with disability. Soon, the mansion's halls echoed with Michael's halting melodies, sometimes accompanied by Mary's untrained but enthusiastic singing. The household staff, who had tiptoed through their duties for so long, noticed the change immediately. Curtains were drawn back, allowing sunlight to flood rooms that had been kept in perpetual twilight. Flowers appeared on tables. The chef, inspired by the transformation, began creating colorful dishes that made Michael laugh with delight. "I thought I was protecting him by keeping the world away," John admitted to his therapist. "Instead, I was just preserving our pain, like some kind of museum exhibit." Each day brought new progress. Michael began therapy sessions that combined physical rehabilitation with emotional healing. He started keeping a journal, filling it with drawings of butterflies and stories about a brave cleaning lady who fought dragons. The mansion, once a mausoleum to grief, gradually transformed into something it hadn't been since before the accident. Mary Johnson found herself in a new role within the Davis household. No longer just a cleaning lady, she had become something far more meaningful, a guardian, a confidant, and a friend to both father and son. The transformation happened so naturally that none of them could pinpoint exactly when the shift occurred. The kitchen, once sterile and unused, became the heart of the mansion under Mary's care. She taught Michael Davis how to fold napkins into the butterfly shapes he loved so much, arranging them carefully beside each plate. These small touches brought life back to mealtimes, replacing the clinical atmosphere with warmth and personality. "It's the little things that make a house feel lived in," she explained to John one evening, as he watched her arrange fresh flowers in the dining room. The millionaire, who had once spent fortunes on expensive artwork that failed to fill the emptiness, now understood the power of these simple gestures. John began to notice details he'd overlooked for years, the way sunlight created patterns on the hardwood floors, how the smell of fresh bread could make the entire mansion feel welcoming. Mary had taught him to appreciate these moments rather than rushing through them. Together they celebrated milestones that might seem insignificant to outsiders, but meant everything to them. The day Michael allowed music to play during physical therapy marked their first impromptu dance party. Mary twirled around his wheelchair while he moved his upper body to the rhythm, his laughter echoing through rooms that had known only silence. John's first genuine smile, not the polite one he wore for business associates, but one that reached his eyes, came during a board game night Mary had organized. He'd knocked over his piece accidentally, and instead of the frustration he would have felt before, he found himself laughing alongside his son. For Mary, belonging came gradually. It was in the drawer John cleared for her personal items, the family photos where she appeared without planning, and the way Michael would wait to start dinner until she joined them at the table. "You've brought the soul back to this place," John told her one evening as they watched Michael sleeping peacefully. The mansion, with its imposing architecture and expensive furnishings, had transformed from a hollow monument to grief into something alive and breathing. The staff noticed the change too. Where once they moved quietly through hallways like ghosts, they now spoke in normal tones, sharing stories and occasionally joining the family for celebration. The house had become a home again, not because of its grandeur but because of the connections being rebuilt within its walls. On the first anniversary of Amanda Davis's passing, the mansion that had once felt like a mausoleum became a sanctuary of remembrance. Mary Johnson gathered John and Michael in the garden where Amanda's favorite roses bloomed in vibrant crimson. The morning air carried a gentle warmth, as if nature itself acknowledged their healing journey. "Today," Mary explained, kneeling beside Michael's wheelchair, "we're going to send a kiss to the sky." She demonstrated by pressing her fingers to her lips, then raising her hand toward the endless blue above. "It's a way to tell someone we love that they're still with us, even when we can't see them." Michael's eyes widened with understanding. His small hand followed Mary's example, sending his own kiss upward with such earnestness that John had to turn away to hide his tears. The boy whispered something only the wind could hear, perhaps a message to the mother, whose face was beginning to blur in his memory. John Davis, watching his son's gesture, finally found the courage to join them. His kiss to the sky was accompanied by words of gratitude. "Thank you for the love you gave us. Thank you for Michael." His voice broke, but for the first time, the breaking felt like release rather than collapse. This simple ritual became their new tradition, a bridge between grief and gratitude, absence and presence. On birthdays, holidays, and ordinary Tuesdays when memories struck unexpectedly, one of them would initiate a kiss to the sky, and the others would join without hesitation. The neighborhood noticed the change. The mansion's gates, once perpetually closed, now opened for weekend barbecues where Michael's laughter rang out across the lawn. Neighbors who had previously whispered about the tragedy behind those walls now brought homemade pies and stayed for coffee. Mrs. Peterson from across the street taught Michael to play chess. The retired music teacher 3 houses down offered piano lessons, adapting techniques for Michael's eager hands. Even the mailman lingered to share jokes that made the boy giggle uncontrollably. The community that had witnessed their suffering now participated in their healing. They brought casseroles and conversation, creating a tapestry of support around the family that had once seemed untouchable in their grief. Mary watched it all with quiet pride. She caught John's eye one evening as neighbors chatted on the patio, Michael at the center of attention with his increasingly elaborate stories. The gratitude in his gaze told her everything words couldn't express. They had created something precious from the ashes of sorrow. The mansion, once a monument loss, had transformed into a testament of resilience, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, truth, and tenderness. John Davis stood by the large bay window of the mansion, watching as Michael spun his wheelchair in playful circles on the patio. The sound of his son's laughter, once so rare, now filled their home daily. 3 months had passed since Jennifer's arrest, and with each sunrise the shadows in their lives receded a little more. "He's getting quite good at those turns," Mary Johnson said, appearing beside him with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. John accepted the drink gratefully. "Thanks to you," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what family really means." Mary nodded, her eyes still on Michael outside. "When Amanda died, I thought our family died with her," John continued. "I built walls around Michael and myself, thinking I was protecting what remained. But you showed me that family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates." The morning sunlight caught in Mary's eyes as she turned to him. "Michael taught me that too." John set down his mug. "Your contract ended last week." "I know," she replied softly. "I'd been looking at some apartments closer to—" "Stay," John interrupted. "Not as our cleaning lady, not as an employee at all." He took a deep breath. "Stay as family. Michael needs you, and if I'm honest with myself, I do too." Mary's eyes widened. "John, you don't have to answer now," he said, "but know that there will always be a place for you here, not because we need someone to care for Michael, but because you've become essential to both of us." Outside, Michael waved at them, pointing excitedly at a butterfly that had landed on his wheelchair. "What did you do that day?" Mary asked suddenly. "When you first saw me dancing with Michael," John smiled. "I made a choice. After 2 years of choosing grief, I chose hope instead." That evening, the three of them sat around the dinner table, a simple meal Mary had prepared, with butterfly-shaped sandwiches as Michael had requested. The formal dining room, once cold and imposing, now felt warm with conversation and shared stories. What had John Davis done after catching his cleaning lady dancing with his wheelchair-bound son? He had opened his heart again. He had allowed healing to enter his home. He had recognized that sometimes family is found in the most unexpected places. As they raised their glasses in their nightly kiss to the sky ritual for Amanda, John realized that his greatest wealth had nothing to do with his bank account. True richness lay in the courage to begin again, in the family they were building together, not from obligation but from choice. And in that moment, John knew with absolute certainty that Amanda would have approved.